Hi, my name is Bob Greener and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome to O-Day Summoning UFOs. This 28th July 2023. Thank you for joining me, Dan Moretti, Corky Goss, Drowning Penguin, Louis Navarro, Artifact, Paul S.G. Tree, Ken Pratt, Charlie C, Dan Moretti. Ask me that question again at the end. I wonder if EVOs respond to thought. Charlie C. Hi, Gordon Doherty. Hi, Yin Gazda. Great to have you here, Cosmic Dave. Disarray. And hi, C. Holmes and Tucker. Great to have you here. So, just to clarify, what you are looking at on the screen is a synthesized image that I made today. It is not representative of any of the subjects that I am talking about in this presentation, other than as a graphic representation. It is not factual based. It is a synthetic image. So please, no one capture this image and say Bob generated a something in the sky, a UFO. It didn't happen. Hi, the Bippo, and hi, Paul O'Neill. Hi, Rick Boyd. President Kennedy, in his speech to the United Nations on September the 25th, 1961, said then that our country, USA, would propose cooperative efforts between all nations in weather predictions and eventually in weather control. So what happened after I gave the presentation O-Day Clouds and Tornadoes was I was sent a message by Mescal in Australia suggesting that I might like to consider the work of Trevor James Constable. Now, I can't recall whether someone actually sent me a link to a video, but as is so often the case when you get sent something and it comes into your Gmail inbox, YouTube tends to use its search algorithm and send you something. And so I went and looked at this video, which I shared today on remoteview.icu. And that led me to look at some other research by this individual, and that is very revealing. So essentially what we were talking about in O-Day Clouds and Tornadoes was that thin cylindrical or honeycomb section structures would have a vibration mode that led to coherent matter de Broglie waves in the ether. And so Alexander Frolov gave a presentation to the Russian community and then to the APEC meetings. And he has this in his book also, from the early 2000s, but he's referring back to Gromednikov's work, and there is talk of a bundle of straws, and that if you look at the vibrational modes, it's constrained around the radius, but in the length it leads to these vibrations of atoms that produce coherent matter waves, so-called and claimed. So I suggested that this might be something to do with the cloudbuster, and that we know the cloudbuster must be dumped into water, and so forth. Anyway, as a recap, I want to go over some things that was discussed in O-Day morning, not morning, and a couple of other presentations before we go ahead. So I'll go and get to those presentations now to just dig out those slides. So thank you for being with me today. O-Day morning, not morning. So as you know, I believe that this Coptic Christian piece of art here, of which it appears the number 10 Downing Street from 1775 is a facsimile, is the most important scientific document on Earth. And in this presentation, I discussed the work of Shakparanov, and that they had Mobius strips lined with copper, effectively one side, treated them with RF and hit them with a big high current pulse, and this produced both positive and negative counter-rotating vortices, vortex pairs, in the simulations using an NVIDIA Tesla simulation software later. That's them simulating later than when these experiments were originally done, or replicators of that work. But anyway, this produces a phase singularity in the same way that the fractal toroidal structures do. And the phase singularity is similar to that which you get at the bottom of a vortex. So very Schauberger. When you look at the bottom of a vortex, you know, definitely here, if I rotate it, this can go that way and this can go that way because it's going around in a vortex, yes? But as you go down and go down and go down to the point, the focal point, the phase singularity, the particles don't know which way they're going. They're going in no direction or all directions. And that is the phase singularity. And that is present also in the fractal toroidal structures and also in the far simpler Mobius strip type devices of Shakparanov. And I referred to the fact that these devices appear to be able to extract energy from a distance, which one might call single bath thermal extraction. And this is the yin, because a yin will extract material from a distance and create new life in the center of the phase singularity. And that is the same as the cover of the alchemical text, which I referred to on Aurora Consurgens, where you had that angel woman with a new birth, with the caduceus coming up the sword in her Vesica Pisces in her belly, and below her feet was a black sphere. So the same thing is represented in that ancient alchemical text. You can go and look at that in my presentation, Aurora Consurgens. In the yang, matter is disassembled in the phase singularity, in my view, and the energy is projected out to this point over here. So this is a yin, this is a yang. And this is the kind of vortex structures on Vega, on Echo, that you're seeing as material gets pulled down. The same kind of vortex structure you see on the water in the Noah water spout. So this is the surface effect of the flow pattern. The section close to the sacred geometry center, or coming into that, in my view, produces this cone, which is a triangle type cone. And depending on the material, it's either sharper in iron here or softer in aluminium, harder here in fused quartz. Now, remember what I was saying about water? I believe that this dark matter clusters, the density of it is able to change the interaction of electrons, and so making low melting point metals kind of like jelly-like, and making water a water gas without actually boiling. And if you think about it, glass is also a liquid, and so that is the same kind of process where glass can basically turn into extremely fine dust very, very easily, and I believe that's the kind of thing that we are seeing in the wind hex. But where this kind of projective yin or projective yang effect I think is most interesting is that in Jacques Paranov's work, as I said before, he found that there was this cone in some of the experiments where he had the blue strands of vortex going into the phase singularity. And he measured this cone from photographs, and it came out at this ratio here, which I have on this slide from O'Day Morning Not Morning. And this is clearly not the golden ratio, but it is very close to Sothic, that I could probably argue, one might reasonably argue, that with the lens specifics of a camera and so forth, that it could have actually been the Sothic triangle, and I suspect it is. The Sothic triangle, of course, is always associated with the Ankh. The lower part of the Ankh is, in my view, the monopole, the key to all hidden knowledge. And this is the disruption zone that we have here, and that would constitute what happens here, either in the extractive sense or the projective sense, in the yin and the yang. And so using this Sothic triangle, and knowing that Tesla was very interested in how the Egyptians, or what the pyramid was for, I believe that he has this D4D structure with the sub-quanta n-1 and below structure formed from these plasma globes that he had around his D4D, top tier of his Wardenclyffe 1914 patent. And that I showed that the outside of the non-conducting structure, it was at the exact Sothic ratio angle, and that as we know that the phase singularity is in the center point here, we have to shift this down, and this means that all of the kind of triangle of influence is inside the structure, and that the disruption zone here would present itself entirely below ground. And I suggested that there would be a water source down here, preferably a flowing water source. Now, the reason I suggest that is for the same reason that I said if you use this technology to maybe disintegrate a building, you would need to build a water feature where in the footprint of that building to decontaminate it from the residual effect. And so it's the same reason I believe that the cloudbusters need to be attached to some water source drain. And actually, in thinking about this in the past few days, the non-disclosed drain of one Neil Crichton Gould for his first lion experiment, where their bulb was lit for 30 minutes, the 20-watt bulb, I suspect now, without finding more detail, and potentially this may be found at some point in his effects, that he was using running water. I think you need to use running water because I believe that it's probably the oxygen dissolved in the water that is important for capturing this etheric matter. It can carry a certain amount. And in the radioactive and biological weaponry, the chemical and biological weapon destruction devices used by the Soviet Union, and after the devices so-called the hydro wave, which I talked about in my Azizi presentation last year, that they then demonstrated in 1997 verified clad-off and the complete destruction of matter and the remediation of nuclear isotopes in extremely fast. They got round the lack of oxygen in there by having an electrical discharge in the water that would produce oxygen and hydrogen, and that goes into the water. So there's a continuous feed of oxygen in there. And so I believe they got round that, and this shows a method by which you could probably continuously produce the thing that's needed, the highly paramagnetic oxygen in water, to capture the etheric matter. Okay, so the way I described the, let's say there's probably one more bit that I need to go into. So that was the Tesla's 1914 patent and the explanation of that. So yeah, Drowning Penguin is saying yes. Geometric systems. He's saying that TJC transitioned away from water to solely geometric systems. The geometric systems clearly work, and so there is that. He does describe that in his video that there is something at the center which is replacing the water accumulator. Now, could that just be a block of iron? Something that is ferromagnetic? It could be, maybe. If we understand that this matter is magnetic and can be stored in metals indefinitely, although in the case of, and that's where it is relevant to start talking about the next presentation I just want to draw from before moving on, and that was Game Over, which I gave on the 15th of May 2022. If I go to that presentation, there was a bunch of things in here which I think are relevant to talk about in this presentation. So, of course, I discussed in here the ball lightning that Henk Uren generated in his eastern plateau of his Vega Valley, and I found, and it has in bulk the materials synthesized around the exploded ball lightning that are observed in an actual ball lightning that's been alive, which was published in Physics Review Letters, observed on a spectroscope. But the things that really are important here are the fact that in exploding foil in water, which will create HHO, there of Ruitskev, replicated many times, they produced ball lightning. This is a mirror, so you can see the ball lightning from above and from side simultaneously. This breaks up into micro ball lightning as self-similar structures. Same thing we witnessed on the 10 yen coin, but the aftermath. And they produced these monopoles that went into iron 57, and they were bound into the iron 57 for 2 days. That would be suitable enough. So what you might have is a very large neodymium magnet at the center of those so-called purely geometric structures, and maybe a large blunt sheet of iron in front of that. Or it may just be sufficient to have a large neodymium magnet. And they observed them to stay there for 2 days in the Ruitskev work. But in the Bogdanovich work, which was, again, ball lightning or long-lived plasmoids forming in a water flow plasma discharge, and also in a high-energy synchrotron-produced electron beam through conversion targets, say tungsten gamma rays. Electrons are pulled out, and it produces this X-ray exposure. They say in there that they believe that the birdies are being knocked off by the gamma rays from the faces of the magnet. Now, if we are to understand that the ether is very low density relic neutrinos, and static electricity is clusters of these, potentially with or without electrons and ions, then it stands to reason that if these have a close magnetic moment, that they will bind to, as observed by the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute, to the poles of a magnet. So what I am suggesting is that the thing that is not disclosed by TJC rather, the thing that is not disclosed, that is at the center of many of the more advanced devices that he had, is potentially a good magnet. Maybe a N52 magnet would be suitable, and you put that in the center of those devices as the accumulator of this etheric matter. Of course, in the case of Bogdanovich here, he's showing that these things are produced by possibly extracting the hidden energy within matter. Okay? In this case, it's knocking ones that have accumulated onto a magnet. These things here, which as I've shown you, look like the libation disc in the Met Museum. That is the lower part of the Acc. Now, in their water flow plasma discharge work more recently, they showed that they produced these plasma luminous toroidal objects which perform translational and rotational movement over the surface of the electrode, and this occurred for up to 2 days. And when I shared this, some people that were doing electron beam hardening of aluminium alloy landing gear for formerly classified military research in the US said that they had got glowing spots that they had to brush off, and sometimes they were lasting 4 months. So to do that, they have to have a means by which they are interacting differently with the metal that they're sat on, and they are self-capturing energy from the environment and cohering that, and potentially that is, some of that is exciting the atoms around and causing a glow, but it's not able to discharge in the ordinary way. They also found these clusters, and they suggest that this may be a type of ball lightning like structure. And in a water spark discharge prior to this being published in a peer-reviewed journal in 2019, on the December the 4th 2018, when we were discussing some other stuff, Juni Tuomela from Finland showed this, and we published this on May the 2016. So there was a similar type structure observed in this video on an ignition secrets, as like the one observed and published later in 2019 by the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. This is HHO, this is HHO. Okay, so what do we have in the air? We have oxygen and we have water vapor. We also have nitrogen, but we have at least HHO. Okay. Now, with those prerequisites under our belt, I can talk a little bit more about what I wanted to say today. Now, in the video that I gave a link to, the author, shall we call him TJC? I don't know, shall we call him TJC? His name is Trevor James Constable, so let's call him Trevor Constable for the purposes of this presentation. Trevor Constable. He tested, with the support of a Singaporean philanthropist, a range of simple devices that he calls simple projectors of etheric force. And with the exception of the straight cone here, most of these are either straight cylinders with a lead material on the back. Okay. And one wonders whether this lead material is like alternating insulators and conductors, which would be potential traps for etheric matter, or a cone. And if you recall from the Solin patents, the EVOs themselves produce a cone and then what appears to be a carbon nanotube, which would be a cylinder. And so we produced that same kind of thing on the titanium that was exposed to a Mars gas and then touched upon some polytetrafluoroethylene. We had an explosion. The experiment was just a few seconds long, but as you recall, on the open cell microcrystals of titanium, those dendrites, there were these carbon, or rather alpha conjugate nuclei cones, and then leading to the remainder of the carbon that was in the payload in my hypothesis for EVOs, leading to a carbon nanotube. So this was in line with what was observed by Solin and stated and drawn in his 1992 patent. So he's saying that most of these devices are based off this Black Widow. But what you can clearly see in these devices is that they are very much thin-walled cylinders. And either with a straight cone, which one might expect is a thin-walled cone. But he says all of these devices, in fact, all of the other devices, which I will show the video clip for afterwards, are based on the Black Widow as the basis for these devices. Okay, so I'm now going to play a video which he calls Etheric Implosive Vortex Systems, or something similar there. And I'm not gonna do something funny that might leave my audio going wonky. So here we go. Sorry if there's some bumping of the microphone.
This is the termite. It's called the termite because it literally bores into the ether as it rotates and the vessel moves. It generates an etheric vortex. Here is another of those termites, a different size. There are many variants of the termite. This is the 4x4, about the size of a coffee cup. This is the box Apache. It is a basic generator of etheric vortices. Those two truncated cones are manifolded into an etheric energy accumulator. This is Irv Trent's skimmer, simpler than the simplest transistor radio, yet capable of generating rain under conditions of a high barometer. You'll see it working. Here are a couple of skimmers attached to a rotating bar. This is called a spider skimmer. Like the skimmer, it raises hob in the atmosphere. Some of these devices, as you can see from my hand, are very small indeed. This is the Matterhorn, 2 tonally tuned chambers. This gets you into the ether and causes the ether to react with this device as you move and rotate it. This is the spider, a generator of vertical etheric vortices. This is capable of surrounding a moving vessel with rain or near rain conditions. Here is a spider operating below decks. They work just the same, no matter how much steel you put around them. If you happen to be a physics professor, this is going to blow your mind. Here is a similar device working on a flying bridge horizontally. There are many variants of these geometric assemblies. All of them aim at creating vortices in the ether, and an implosive etheric vortex will produce rain regardless of the barometer. All of these units are descended from the original projectors like this one, the Black Widow.
So there you have it. All of those etheric vortex systems, which are implosive devices for generating weather systems, were based on the original Black Widow type device, which is shown here, top left. And in the extended video, which is very thorough, he does talk about the water, which in a minute I'm going to show you the book, which is actually a book of an interview, but it discusses much of his life's work. He says running water was the important thing. This thing that he replaced it with looks like a round cylindrical, basically looked like a bit like a magnet to me. And given what we know, and that I've just walked through, I suspect that it is a good, strong magnet. And you can actually see in some of the video where you're able to look through these tubes, they actually have something suspended in the middle. Okay? So, as I said, to clarify that point, in O-Day, well, Game Over, in the work of Etheric, he showed that these things could be aggregated in iron when it has a magnet on the back side. But the magnet itself would seem to be sufficient based on the peer-reviewed published work from the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute by Bogdanovich et al. So, then the question is, are you pulling the material in or are you pulling the material out? I would suggest that if you are trying to capture these things into water, you are acting in the fashion of a yin. If you're trying to project these things out, you would use a yang. And that would require different poles of the magnet. Okay? So, if you want to pull them in, you would want to be a yin. And that would be the basic way, in my view, that the Cloudbuster would work. It would be withdrawing energy from the far field in the form of what they call in the Lockheed Martin patent single bath thermal extraction. And that would come into the phase singularity of the imploding vortex. And this would then be stored in the oxygen in the running water, or in the body of water, as per Wilhelm Reich. In the case of the work of Constable, I believe that he had got ahead of himself, those in the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute and at the Kurchatov Institute where Etheric worked. I think he used a magnet. Okay? So I actually am interested in placing a couple of devices on the top of the forest house that I have access to and see if I can encourage a little bit more rain, because a lot of the oak trees on the protected forest near where I live are having a little bit of drought issues. And my darling wife has chimed in. Thank you, my love. She said I need a haircut, and yes, I probably do. Lovely. And yes, this was Paul O'Neill who actually sent me this video. So thank you, Paul. It was Mescal who originally pointed me to the work of Constable, just as have you considered Constable's work? And I thought, I don't really know who that is. And then almost the same sort of time, Paul O'Neill sent me that video. Now, from that video, I saw, I wanted to investigate further, as one might be expected to do. And I looked at a book of his, and we are going to look at that now, because it is very, very interesting. It is called Loom of the Future, and you can get it from the Internet Archive. I will share all of the links tomorrow. And here it is. This is Weather Engineering Work of Trevor James Constable, and it's an interview conducted by Thomas J. Brown. Okay. So let's see what we can see here. As we can see, it is, and I've got it in edit mode, which I will turn off. It was published by Borderland Sciences, but like I say, it's freely available on the Internet Archive, and you can download it in EPUB format or PDF, whatever you like. And the weather engineering work of Trevor James Constable. And you can see that this was first published in December 1994, and only 1,000 copies were made. So if anyone's a little bit keen out there, maybe they can get an original print copy of that 1,000 copies. That would be interesting. And it had been since published digitally. And it's in memory of Anthony Segretti from 1929 to 1993. Friend of the Earth. So this is Trevor James Constable himself in California, circa 1982. He spent a lot of time on the sea. And this is where it gets immediately very interesting. He has this character here called Dr. Jim Woods. And Constable is working with Dr. Jim Woods at 1000 Palms Oasis in 1968, and he has a cloudbuster here. They carried out a UFO photography project using a cloudbuster to attract plasmoid type UFOs that they had previously photographed in 1957 to 1960. Now, can I just put this into context? They were photographing plasmoid type, in their words, UFOs from 1957 to 1960. And they were using a cloudbuster to attract plasmoid type UFOs. Okay? Now, the term plasmoid was only made public in 1957 by one Winston Bostick. Right? So, you know, are these people connected? One may think they probably are. Certainly on the periphery. Use of this cloudbuster caused gross changes in local desert weather. UFOs were indeed photographed, but the attraction of using the ether and the cloudbuster to engineer weather was irresistible. Woods later passed away after a long illness. Now, may I remind you of President Kennedy's words. We will go into that presentation in a little while. President Kennedy, in his speech to the United Nations on September the 25th, 1961, said then that our country, USA, would propose cooperative efforts between all nations and weather predictions and eventually in weather control. 1961. Let's go back. So you have the whole story about Wilhelm Reich having his work destroyed and being put in jail and dying in jail. And we'll get back to that in a little while. Where was I? But this fits this timeline. So you have the plasmoid research, which came out of from 1948. So 3 years after the nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this desire to pursue the hydrogen bomb. Out of the production of the hydrogen bomb in 1948, Winston Bostick was assigned the task of trying to convert that into domestic fusion energy. And by 1957, he had published that plasmoids could explain all of the matter in the universe from subatomic all the way up to galaxies. This electromagnetic putty, as he described it. And right from that time, you've got them referring to plasmoid. Now, this might be an after-the-fact referral to it as plasmoid, but these are these glowing things that you see in a lot of claimed UFOs. Now, is this a UFO that is maybe sentient? Well, Ken Shoulders did say that exotic vacuum objects behave as if they are sentient. They have interrelationships with each other. They interact with other matter. And he's described some ways that can occur. Chukhanov also described other ways. And many bull lightning researchers have described ways that those things can occur. And so the thing is, they are using a cloudbuster. Here we go. TJC at Giant Rock. Where have I heard that before? Giant Rock, California, in May 1958, during early photo projects aimed at objectifying UFOs directly from the invisible state. Infrared film was employed. This work eventually led to the use of cloudbuster 10 years later. Infrared film was employed. Now, remember what I was saying about the Shak Paranoff work? If it'll actually stay on the presentation. Infrared film would show a zero albedo, a single bar thermal extraction from a far field. It would show that. Okay? So, if you had a device that was causing an implosive effect and drawing in, potentially with a coherent matter wave that was traveling towards the phase singularity at the center of this structure, or it was somehow causing that at some level in the environment, then you might manifest things that would be unidentified flying objects. They would be in the sky and you wouldn't know what they were. And in their case, they were observing them with a thermal IR film. So the rest of the environment would be hotter and they would see a cold black spot that could move around. It could move around potentially if they were moving their cloudbuster around, or the vortex itself was influenced by other things in the environment. You could have a scenario where it was moving around very, very quickly, and it isn't a case of it's being propelled. It's a case, and it wouldn't show any propulsion. But it might leave a cold trail behind it. But it's not a UFO. It's not a UFO in the, I've got aliens sitting in there going, haha, you don't know how we work. It's a UFO in the fact that we don't know why it's in the sky and we can detect it on an IR camera. But it's there and it exists and it can move around seemingly very quickly. So this is where I'm going to say something of deep caution. Many of you may know, and you can see it on my blog. Let me just make sure I get my worms correct here. You can see in my interview with Ross Coulthart from 11th of January 2021, my testimony for a UFO event. But essentially, to cut a long story short, I saw with my 3 brothers and my sister 4 unidentified flying objects. However, in our case, this wasn't something we asked to manifest. It wasn't something that we saw kill anyone or do any damage or whatever. It was my father that told us to stand and watch. We saw these things. It's in the interview. what happened, and then after we saw them, we were told to go to bed. That is my experience. But in retrospect, knowing that my father rather, had connections with the Navy and also connections with the Masonics, and just some good friends. When I think about where I was seeing it from my house in Offington region of Worthing in the UK, and the direction I was looking in, this would be possibly a mobile unit projecting these things into the sky, and it would have been located at the world's oldest airbase, which is at Shoreham in the UK. And my dad, he would constantly, like, we'd drive past Shoreham and he'd tell me little anecdotes about that. So I don't know. So I think maybe there was some devices at Shoreham, and this potentially was where they were projecting them. Now, given the fact that these are able to do single bar thermal extraction, or rather potentially extract the hidden energy within matter at a distance, this would cause matter to collapse or to denature. Therefore, whilst it is an interesting thing to see in the sky, and in his case, this wasn't single bar thermal extraction. What we were looking at was something akin to the yang, which would have been these devices, where it's projecting energy into the sky. But the principle is largely the same. One is the single bar thermal extraction, one is the taking the hidden energy within matter and projecting it out to this point. So what I'm saying is that a device like this could disrupt matter, and a device like this could disrupt matter in a different way. I believe that this, for instance, could cause matter to be overexcited. This would lead to non-thermal melting. So, for instance, an aluminium engine could become jelly-like, and that's not very good when you've got an aluminium engine. That would be something similar to what happened to the PAP device. And in this case, you could extract energy, and this could do unpleasant things to humans. And I believe that this is what was being discussed by possibly the late Dubovik in the panicked session in January in 2018, when they met at the Moscow Physics Friendship University to discuss the death of Yurzy Bazhatov. And he talked about, you have to be careful near this type of system because it literally sucks the life force out of you. So both of these have horrendous military implications. I believe that this probably is something akin to the non-particle projection device, but death ray of Tesla, or in the same family. And this is actually Tesla's generator. So this is the ray, and this is the generator. So this is possibly what I saw, and it would make extreme sense for it to be at an airbase or an airport. But it's a very small airport, but it's the world's oldest airport. It would make complete sense for it to be there. It would be very easy to move it in and do a demonstration, but it would make an incredible air defense system. So, like I say, I was in the Offington area of Worthing. It was probably around about 1979, and the direction I was looking in, it was most likely over Shoreham Airfield, and therefore the entire thing is consistent to me. Okay. So, with that being said, you may or may not know that my first presentation was on my blog, Remote View, was of the bomb-Aaron effect and introducing this awarded patent to Lockheed Martin of systems and methods for generating coherent matter wave beams. And I related this to the Hutchison effect. Most importantly, the single bath thermal extraction here. This is the yin process going on. And so my warning is this. The spooks don't say things that they don't want you to that they don't want you to know. They say things that they want you to know. So I think we have to be very, very, very aware right now that we are being manipulated potentially into thinking that there are these things out there. We know they're there, blah, blah, blah. We're seeing more sightings of them, la, 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 la. And then suddenly we have a fake alien invasion. And if you are preconditioned to believe that glowing objects in the sky are actually aliens rather than a fairly simple defense system. I mean, it's not very good for you can mount it to an aircraft and then it becomes offense, but when they're just floating around in the sky, they're probably land-based systems. And the reality of these things is they might even be underground. So if you look at the the author Trevor James Constable, he's saying these devices even work through many inches of steel inside the hull of the aircraft, of the ship, the Maui ship that he was using. And so the implications are you could not see the devices creating these things. They could be inside a normal 18-wheeler container. They could be everywhere, and they could be turned on, and it would look like an alien invasion, right? And all they have to do is just have a couple of things blown up and say that was, and have some people say that was caused by the thing, and you're done. You've got an alien invasion. You've got total panic, right? But it would be completely fake. Completely fake. So don't be fools. I tried to warn about what happened with the nonsense before. Year and a half before. I'm probably in a unique position. I don't know anyone that's had, maybe lots of people had the same experience where their father came up to them and said, right, line up, look at the skies, and something happens, and then after it's finished, it tells you to go to bed. But I don't think many people have had that experience. The things that he told me, maybe they helped me understand what I've seen since. But this is a fact. This is a fact. They are using coherent matter waves, of which these cylindrical, conical, and etheric vortex generating devices of Trevor James Constable will produce. Even if you have an opinion on whether they will or they won't, they'll do it, and you'll just have your opinion. And then this process of coherent matter waves can lead to single bath thermal extraction. And that I am arguing that is exactly what is going on here in the Shack Power and Off generator, which produces a phase singularity in the same way that these etheric vortex systems will do, in the same way that the fractal toroidal electromagnetic structures will do. Don't let them fool you again. Don't let them fool you again. They're just pretty lights. Yes, if you happen to be a bit of aluminium, have an aluminium engine or a car engine there, it's not going to fare very well. It's not going to fare very, very well. But it's not an alien invasion. It's not an alien invasion. It's fake. It's not to say that aliens don't have this technology. Why wouldn't they? It's just part of nature, but it's just technology. And it's not mystical, and it's not magical. It's just not. It's just engineering. Now, I was asked at the beginning of the presentation, is this potentially controllable? Well, I have argued that when you are meditating, you are producing these exotic vacuum objects from your fingers. Ken Shoulders argues that the easiest way is to see a spark coming out of your finger. But Keith Fredericks showed that he could produce strange radiation tracks with his finger without sparks coming out, without having a magnet, so it shows that they're affected by magnets, and on X-ray film. So you go and have a look at Keith Frederick's work. I've discussed it in the past. This means they are potentially continuously coming out of your fingers. I've argued that that is the basis for faith healing. That is the basis for the frisson that you feel when you're first in love with someone and they are connecting through your consciousness, because I think these things are consciously connected. The things that you produce, your exotic vacuum objects that are produced and come out of your fingers, the dark matter that comes out of your fingers and out of your points on your body in a sort of Kirlian photography way, are connected with your consciousness. You've influenced that mass stream. It's gone through your body and it's projected out of your body. Okay? So when it comes to, you know, water crystallization, and also there's an Austrian, I meant to do a whole O-Day series on this a long time ago. There's this Austrian guy that asks people to, they have little, they have a mixture of salt solution, a big mixture of salt solution. Then they get like a syringe and pull a load of syringefuls of this salt solution. And then they ask people to, and I think I've discussed this before actually, they ask people to touch the end of the syringe with their fingers and then lay down 5 spots or 4 spots on a microscope slide. And then they wait for the crystallization to happen. Now, each slide has different crystals on, as one might expect. But for each of the individual spots on the one slide by the individual that is putting it down, the crystals are largely the same. Now, I have said this before, but the proviso that I have in this instance is that each particular slide is in its own part of space. It's got its own constant temperature, or relatively constant temperature. You know, it might have been put on a bit different part of the table that has a different thermal vibration going on. So it might be more a fact of the substrate. My control would be to have 4 people do this experiment with 4 syringes. They touch, but then they each put one of their drops on the same slide. And I don't believe this has ever been done by the Australian scientist. If it still works, where across each of the 4 slides by 4 people, all have the same crystal structure, but it's different between the different people, then I would buy the argument. That being said, I still believe that the faith healing, the laying on of the hands, the frisson that you feel when you're touched by a prospective lover, when that connection is being made and you're allowing those conscious connections to occur. Then comes the subject of Jack Houck's work, which I remastered the 1983 paper on the psychokinesis parties from the CIA Freedom of Information Archive. And it says here, get a point of concentration in your head. Make it very intense and focused. Grab it and bring it down through your neck, down through your shoulder, down through your arm, through your hand, and put it into the silverware at the point you intend to bend it. Command it to bend. Release the command and let it happen. Okay? So what they are arguing here is you are trying to get a really intense feeling and you project that into what comes out of your fingers into the metal. Now, we know these things get stored in metals indefinitely, in conductors. They appear to aggregate, according to our experiments in the Vega experiments and also in the work of Matsumoto, at crystal grain boundaries. Now, if they are able to be influenced because they are connected to your consciousness, because every single one of that dark matter that came out of your fingers has been through the atoms in your body and it somehow becomes entangled with it, then you are asking it to bend to your will, literally. Now, I remember in my singing training that I was always asked to visualize, places where I wanted the sound to come out. And genuinely, you're giving the sound itself its own ontological will that you are, you are layering onto the sound that you are producing the ontological will of yourself. So the thing that comes out of your mouth, the word, you have a desire for it to achieve a particular effect. So I believe that's what's going on here, literally. And what they did is when they looked at these pieces of metal that were affected by this process, they found that there was some kind of what they call melting, but I don't think it's melting. I think it's disruption of the way that metal grain, the electrons are able to interact on a crystal grain boundary. And they are able to aggregate these things that are able to be influenced by the conscious person that delivered them. And they are able to bend the material. Okay? Now, this comes to the whole thing of the C5 protocol and the fact that if you are projecting and creating these so-called plasmoid type structures, which I believe are overexcitations of an etheric fractal toroidal structure, that if they are coming from your consciousness or they're coming from your intent, your ontological will, or rather it is your ontological will that they appear, then they will appear and you will have a modicum of control over them. And what I believe this is doing is we are relearning the Dogon people's, the ancient pre-Egyptian people's ability to control matter. So there's this English professor who went and visited the Dogon people. These are people that disagreed with the pharaohs in Egypt, and they went out to, I think, Mali or somewhere actually in central West Africa. And they used the same hieroglyphs, but when this guy was saying, what do these things mean, these hieroglyphs, they said, well, this means that we've got control over matter, and so on. So this doesn't surprise me. And so I believe that this would be the mechanism that it occurs. And this is where you really have the power to change things on a physical level. And this is where the concept of the power of prayer, the intent, the wish to create a particular outcome, or the desire to foster a false narrative to a level at which you believe it so strongly that it contaminates everyone else's thoughts, because you are a transmitter as well as a receiver. And if a couple of members of your family are transmitting a particular thought pattern, you're going to feel it, whether you like it or not, and it's going to potentially affect your thought patterns and your decision making. And so it takes a strong will to see the truth through the cloud of perceived truths. The perceived truths may not be true. They are objectively false. But if sufficient people with your transmitter, close to your DNA, are projecting a particular thought, then you will pick up on that, and you may start to have your thoughts bent. And the whole thing can be false. So this is where it becomes extremely dangerous. This is what you call a psychotronic weapon. If you can record someone's thoughts and project back at them a variation of that thought, that's a psychotronic weapon. If you can record a particular state of an emotion and then play that back to someone, they might think they're in that emotion, but they're not. But in all real sense, they feel they are. And so it's very difficult to understand these things and not feel a sense of deep sorrow, because we're getting to a point where there's very desperate people that might choose to use these tools that were developed. This is John Hutchison. Hutchison effect, again, overloading of the metal lattice and lattice grain crystal grain boundaries with this magnetotorelectrical radiation, causing it to be not able to hold the lattice together. It's non-thermal process, and so the aluminium exposed to this, when Alec Pizarro, a colleague then of John Hutchison, went to pick up this formerly and momentarily glowing piece of metal, momentarily before he grabbed it, glowing, and it's glowing because the atoms are trying to release this excess of etheric matter that they have in them, that, you know, to the environment. And so it's exciting that environment and making it look like it's hot, but it's not hot. It typically doesn't go below, above orange or whatever. Yeah, so he left his fingerprints in, and he smudged his things in there. Anyway, so this brings me to the Hutchison book. That we're getting very close to having the pieces in place for me to go ahead with it. And as one of the rewards, I will say that we will have 4 copies of George Hathaway's book, Mind Bending, because George was of the belief that John has an influence over the effect, and that may well be the case. If he has touched the metals, then, and if he's the last person to touch those metals, then they will have some quanta of his coherent, bound, entangled dark matter that's come out of his body in that metal. And if he energizes those structures, perhaps they still are able to be bent to his will, but they are much more powerful. This is summoning a genie. This is summoning a genie. It's manifesting a kind of magic, okay? So the cool thing about these mind-bending books, which we have 4 of, is that they are uniquely signed by George Hathaway himself when I was there with him in Toronto. So there will be 4 of these up for grabs in one of the levels, the reward levels. Okay, so back to Trevor Constable. Plasmoids, which were just announced, he's trying to summon using a cloudbuster, which produces coherent matter waves in the ether. It's basically having deduced this and then being sent this video, and then the week before last, or last week, before I went to this extremely interesting conference in France, and I will have you must not miss the presentation on Sunday. You absolutely must not miss it. I got to see exactly the person I needed to see first, and then I got to see someone else that I wanted to see, and arrange the thing that I wanted to arrange, and then got a bonus. But it's a lot of story to tell. But I have to thank Yin Gazda, the former partner of John Hutchison, for inviting me and for being there by my side and working her incredible networking magic and connecting me to the right people at that event. I can tell you some little strange stuff going on there. Yeah, it's going to be a good one on Sunday. But what we are saying here is that he's effectively inviting UFOs to peer by creating coherent matter waves. We are arguing that telekinesis in the form of spoon bending and metal bending per se, psychokinetics, is where something has gone into the metal and then you can bend that to your will. Now, in the Russian meetings, I shared a presentation that was given by one Vlad Zhigalov. And I'm just going to show a couple of clips from that now. So you can go and see this. This is about the psychokinetic individual N. Kulagina, and it's in Russian, but there are clips of this person, and it was very... And there are some clips of her doing various things here.
Чтобы совершенно исключить возможность применения каких-либо ниток, о чем всегда...
Okay, so she moves things around.
С ее стороны обман и жульничество какое-нибудь. Но вот в результате таких длительных контактов с ней можно было убедиться. И она, и муж ее, который живо интересуется способностями жены, являются людьми, задающимися целью понять, в чем же тут суть дела.
Это состояние очень вызывается большой энергией, большим напряжением, особенно боль в позвоночнике идет, и слуха потери при этих опытах, потери зрения, резкая потеря, даже другой раз кто-то из ученых видит, что передвигается при...
Essentially, you can go and have a look at this video. You can see the auto translation. Basically, this person had to get herself into an intense emotional state, and then she could project something through her hands. And you can see in this case there's a perspex container here, that she's moving around a matchbox, moving around various other objects. She's also able to cause threads to melt and things like that. So it's the same thing as is being described here by Jack Houck in the CIA's document, that you must make a very intense, you get a point of concentration in your head and make it very intense and focused. And so we do have the power to do this. And some of us are not aware of it. And what I must ask you to do is, when you are in an intense state of mind, think about the damage that you can do around you. You don't even realize you're doing it. When you are in an intense, impassioned state, really think about any intent that you project. It can have real consequences. So that is basically, in my view, the principle behind the CE5 protocol. You're not creating real UFOs, although they are real UFOs, if you know what I mean. They are in the sky, they are moving around, they appear to have consciousness, blah, blah, blah. They might even bend to your will, seem to be interacting with you because you're asking them to, because they are a part of you. Ken Shoulders would argue that these things have their own, life. And certainly what we have seen in Vega experiments, when these things are technologically produced, they certainly look like they have their own life. Ball lightning seems to have its own kind of life. It seems to want to consume matter. Like, for instance, the microball lightning that was consuming the oxygen on the copper oxide in the 10 yen coin exposed to a Mars gas in 2019. It was moving around and consuming the material, but it didn't go back along the channel where there wasn't any oxygen to consume. It was moving in the direction where it had food. And you see this kind of thing, and Henk refers to it as it's kind of like eating, it's eating. And that's what it's doing. It's literally, it's going where there's something to consume. And so it looks like it has life. And then it kind of hides, as he calls it, and that appears to be where it likes to go to, like, re-energize in a sort of resonant cavity. And then when it's over-energized, it can come out and do some eating. And this is kind of what life does. It goes into a shelter. Once it's had some food, it does some other things, maybe has some sleep, gets its energy back, and then goes out and does some stuff in the environment around it. So it's acting like it is alive. And if these things are made by invocation, by intense desire for these things to manifest, then it would look like it's alive, but actually it's an extension of us. In the same way, and I've done this demonstration before, this bag of rubbish that my soul is carried around in, my spirit is carried around in, I'm asking my hand to move like that, right? Okay? A car can become an extension of yourself. A gun becomes an extension of yourself. The gun doesn't shoot itself. It's the person that shoots the gun, right? So, you know, these are things where it seems a little bit weird because they're at a distance. They're at a distance. And we're so used to... It was difficult, I think, for people to conceptualize these things before, let's say, the mobile phone, where you couldn't cause something to occur at a distance very, very easily. But now, when you think that there's something that can almost instantaneously take an effect at a distance, then it may be as easy a concept for people to grasp. That's an electromagnetic wave projected from a device where you've put a physical input. Now, you're cutting out the middleman. You're creating the electromagnetic signal and you're projecting it out in the form that it will interact with the dark matter that's in the environment, maybe cause it to cohere, maybe cause it to then form a structure that is self-feeding, that produces your glowing object in the sky, your C5 manifestation, and then you're seeing something. But it is a UFO. It might appear to have life, but it's not aliens invading. Okay? It's not. So I encourage people to go and view the video of N. Kaladina, and he refers to some of the things that she does, which is very similar to strange radiation. Lastly, I'd like to show again from one of my previous presentations, this image of the hypothesized structure by Lockheed Martin in their systems and methods for generating coherent matter wave beams. And this is how the coherent matter would cluster. And I have to say, it really does look like a buckyball, and it really does look spherical. And that's what we see produced. Okay? All right. So thanks again, Paul O'Neill, for sending that to me. Now, there's so much in this document by Constable, and I've already mentioned the fast-flowing water being necessary. I've mentioned that obviously this is for Borderlands, and you see in here unbelievable numbers of references to UFOs. Just unbelievable. So many UFO references. And you'll also see some famous names. There's this duck in this story which likes to sit by the drain here. It's a good fun read. I've only read bits of it. TJ's original collaborator in his UFO work, the late Dr. James O. Woods, seen here with the late modification of the original Willie's Wand unit, built by the two men in the early 1970s. Doc Woods was an early weather engineer pioneer. Now, yeah, I don't think this device worked. Maybe it did. I don't know. But it looks like it's just one of these standard kind of like zinc anodized ducting for if you sort of like when you've got a restaurant and you want to get rid of the fumes type thing. This is a cloudbuster in Lugano in Switzerland. People in the Lena field might have heard of the word Lugano before. Some fairly interesting people live out there. This is a whole bunch of them in the San Bernardino Mountains. All kinds of cloudbusters arranged there. Now, the really interesting thing is that this work that he did on the Maui, this is the ship that was funded by this Wu guy. I think it's up here. It's here it says, where is it? It says somewhere here who funded it. Anyway, it's there somewhere. South Singaporean chap. What they're doing is they're trying to create clouds in incredibly difficult situations. And then they also claim to fill up a huge area in Egypt and in Israel, and also in Malacca in Malaysia. Now, having read this and reconsidered the pyramid, I'm minded to think that a major purpose of the Great Pyramid was as a weather modification device to create a very intense vortex around it, and to have a constant wave pushed of pressure in front of it, causing very intense rains over the Sahara and maybe the Middle East. And therefore, it may have been a system to generate arable land in that region. So, don't know, just putting it out there as a thought, having considered what this document is talking about here. So, the interesting thing is he has these satellite maps. So this is talking about when he was using it in Malaysia. So for those that don't know, Singapore is down here, and Malacca is this driest region in Malaysia, and they have their weather machines here, and the weather systems are all the way around this dry region where they shouldn't be. And that's that. Yeah. But it's the stuff on the ship that I think is really interesting, because he actually has satellite, or rather radar systems. So this is the Maui, and I think it just basically went from America to the Hawaiian Islands, carrying things back and forth. And so it was a good gig. You could get the devices on the front and on the back or whatever, and do the tests. Okay, and these are the devices that you just saw in that video. So these are some of the people involved. They had various cameras. But here's the very interesting thing, and I include that in my presentation here. So the first use of the Cloudbuster aboard the SS Maui in 1979. You've got the ship going over here. Vessel is at screen center here. Screen diameter is 48 nautical miles. Heading flasher is diagonal, dotted line, this one here. Showing ship heading southwest. Ship speed is 22 knots. Barometer is very high, 1025 millibars. Relative humidity is 75%. Radar scope shows no rain, as you would expect in those conditions. Echoes at Cloudbuster turned on at 8:30 p.m. So they've just turned on the Cloudbuster at 8:30 p.m. Radar scope at 9:30 p.m., this is an hour later, shows rain echoes that developed at 10 to 12 miles right on heading flasher. This was in response to Cloudbuster operation aiming over the ship's stern. Rain activity spread out and an arrowhead formed to each side of the vessel, diminishing sharply once abaft. So the genius of being on a ship and doing this is that, well, people can't argue that you're putting people's lives at risk because you're out on a ship and everyone on the ship is in on the story. But also, you are moving around and you have a radar, so you can see if it's you that's causing the rain or it's something else. And so basically they have these rain shadows being picked up on the radar that emanate from, just in front of the ship. So hold on a little bit, 10 to 12 miles in front of the ship. So 10 to 12 miles in front of the ship, something is happening here, and that is causing rain to be produced, and it's fanning out in a cone. And then they turn it off, and the rain production turns off, and they've just got this arrowhead left with it dissipating behind them. That does look incredibly convincing. In this case, they have a different type of device here. As the ship steers 070 degrees for California, the east to west flow of etheric force near Oahu, Hawaii, is being dammed up by engineering procedures as the vessel moves. Damming the vast flow of force causes a local rise in etheric potential. This in turn causes lower potential etheric force from farther east to pile into the damned area, obeying the reverse blah, 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 blah. Very high millibars there, shouldn't get rain, but they do. And look at the shape of this structure. Yeah, it's that shape. It's that shape. Okay, so we're going to have a look a little bit more at the... They have other ones here with different devices. The different devices are producing different types of radar patterns. So this is the box Apache here. And this is a different one. This is two polyvinyl chloride projector tubes. So this is how simple this is, at least at that level. And you can see there's something is suspended in the middle of the back here. So I believe that this is a magnet, given on what we know from the Russian research and also from electroculture and things like that, from the work of Perovstikov, the fact that he aggregated in water using magnets below water and then was able to produce the birdies by stimulating their release from the water using a laser. Here we go. This is what the Apache produced. A little different pattern, but it's in line. And if you look at the video that Paul sent me, as the ship is moving forward, the band of rain follows the ship. It's like that scene out of the Truman Show where the guy is walking around and the cloud is following him. It's just hilarious. He goes, "Come on!" like this. Okay. So, yeah, in this one you can clearly see it. There is something suspended in the middle of the tube here. I think they've got these, maybe a metal spike goes through and it's in the center. So I'm pretty sure of what that might be. Is a magnet. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. I like this girl's trousers as well. Well, it's actually a whole one piece. Anyway, he looks very happy doing his work, and I can understand why. I would be very happy doing this as well. And this is just hilarious. This car. This is just that's the stuff of legend, isn't it? It reminds me of John Hutchison's ray gun on the top of his mobile home. It's definitely in the same kind of a class of device. You could love that, man. That's just so funny. Definitely people having fun. There we go. All right, so has anyone got any questions? So join the technicians. Yeah, let's address the passive nature of these unpowered cloudbusters. Well, it's not strictly passive, is it? As I've said, in one case they're using flowing water, and that is nothing is really in static state. So firstly, the whole principle is that you have vibrations, and as I've argued before, the vibrations in a cloudbuster could come from the pipes connecting into water, but really it doesn't even need to be that. It is just the literal fact that the different resonant modes that can occur, and the fact that you have a large ring. This basically is creating like a soliton that comes out of the end, okay? And that is exactly what you would want it to do. Now, depending on the length, might be very important. Depending on the I mean, in their case, they have some that are cone-shaped but thin. So you can imagine if they're doing that there is an intensification. Now, in the work of Shishkin and his colleagues, they used cones and span them at a very high speed. You've got the homopolo effect, of course, things coming out, but also there's this projection down to the end of the cone. They tried it with different materials and they produced these birdies, the same as they did in the cavitation device. So the fact that Constable is using a cone in this particular image here, this cone, that's not too dissimilar from the cone that was spun at a high speed by Shishkin et al. But, you know, how fast does a weather system rotate? I don't expect it rotates much faster than this device. Sorry, I didn't show you. This cone here. Okay? And these devices don't turn that fast, but how fast does a weather system turn? You know, and if you're able to create vorticity in the ether, then it will have self-similar structures that may themselves drive themselves to a higher localized energy level. So Daniel Foster says, Bob, should we make a global cloudbuster task force to educate the public before invasion sham takes place? Task force posting videos of work here on YouTube, etc. I would suggest that we could try and reverse engineer some of these devices. There's almost certainly enough scrap around, I would say 25% of your homes to have a go. I would suggest that maybe 30% of you have got neodymium magnets lying around, or you have a source of running water, hopefully, because you're civilized, potentially. Or at least it's a classification some people ascribe to civilized people having running water. And that you could create devices. You can reverse engineer from looking at this turnbuckle up here, or from the width of this pillar here, possibly the dimensions. I haven't even looked to see if he's got patents, or maybe he has got patents. I don't know. Maybe people could look into it further and find out whether they have any more, how should we put this? More description of what's going on in these things. One could ask, is this I'm just looking at it now, are these the angles of the Great Pyramid? I don't know. Maybe. Why not? Why would you not make them the angle of the Great Pyramid? Anyway, and then can we generate, like they were claiming to do, which started them on the whole cloud busting thing, encouraging UFOs to be captured? And then in their case, they were using infrared film, but we have the ability to have infrared cameras these days, don't we? So, like, can we capture on infrared cameras, which is, by the way, what some of the military have caught these so-called UFOs on, right? It could be military spoofing military, right? But I'm saying that these things, if they're good enough, making weather and disrupting whether water becomes a gas or whether it becomes a liquid, what's happening here, right, is the reverse of what I'm saying the pyramid is doing. The pyramid is taking water in its well, which you vary by changing some parameter of the feed for the well, right? It's converting that water in the well into water gas, and ideally into separated hydrogen and oxygen, okay? That is decondensing the water using probably putting too much energy, extracting energy, put too much energy in of this dark matter, which overexcites the atoms and the relationship between the electrons. In the case of the cloudbusters here, I believe they are doing a yin process. They are pulling the energy out. They're condensing it into the water, oxygen dissolved in the water, or in this case, a neodymium magnet in the focal point or the central point of these various devices. And that is causing condensation. It's the reverse process. Decondensation, the pyramid. Condensation, the cloudbuster. Decondensation, the pyramid. Condensation, the... it's a yang process for the pyramid. It's a yin process for the Cloudbuster. So Dan Moretti is saying, Bob, do you think that the Cloudbuster-like devices could somehow be used to transduce intention in psychotronic sort of way? I think so we are conscious beings. If you like I said with John Hutchison, maybe because he was the last person that touched the metal as he arranged it on the non-conductive surface, he imbued some of the dark matter that flows out of his fingers into that metal, and then he charges that technologically, and then potentially he's able to manipulate the matter or sense that the matter is at a particular state, or that the matter is connected back to him and he can feel the matter's distress. Do you understand what I'm saying? What I'm saying is the fields that he's varying are causing the matter to twist around because it's overexcited by the combination of the magnetotoroelectrical radiation that's been produced by the uranite source and by the phase conjugated electromagnetic waves that are introduced and the static electricity and magnetotoroelectrical radiation from the disruptive discharges. Those are aggregating into the metal, but because he's already touched the metal to begin with, when he's not looking at it, because invariably he was nowhere near the active area when he was doing it, but he could feel it. Now, he could sense in two ways. One, he's listening at a AM radio between bands, which we know prior to his work is something that is used to detect these things blowing up. Whether he discovered that by himself it's irrelevant. He was using that method. So he has the auditory feedback of exotic vacuum objects producing, getting too excited and exploding and causing an EMP, which produces white noise on the between band tuned AM radio. Secondly, he has this intuitive sense from the original charge clusters, the original dark matter that flowed out of his fingers into the metal as the last person that touched him. Now, it may be that if someone else is arranging the metal on the table, that they are more connected with it, but they don't know what to feel when they're twiddling the knobs, whereas John could feel that. That being said, it was made into a technological process, and I think we're going to have a very, very exciting year this year. I mean, mind-bendingly exciting. I've got a microscope session on Tuesday where I will be looking at the map of the Great Pyramid of Giza that was produced in the Vega experiment that Henk Uren did, where I asked him put a piece of metal like that and things, so we had various resonant gaps, and he came up with that particular arrangement of the experiment, and thankfully he chose the materials he did, and it produced that wonderful structure. So I'm interested what's happening in that so-called subterranean zone and around the wormhole area. Is that actually a hole that we can see in the microns or at nanometer level in the cap of that dome of that area? So, and I think we can learn a huge amount from that. There's other samples that I have, and I'm hoping some samples will arrive before I go on Tuesday. But pending the outcome of that, I have an experiment planned, and I think it's going to. I think it will be utterly conclusive if it works, extremely repeatable, and it will both validate Tesla and Hutchison at the most extreme level, and it'll be done. It'll just be done, right? It'll be done. So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of things to set up. Other people have to get things together, But it was a good step forward last week, and we'll have to see what happens when I look at these samples and if things show themselves next week. Okay, so TGC said it was scaffolding pole in a puddle that he noticed causing the effect. Well, the puddle will have water in it. The water has the paramagnetic oxygen in it. It's the paramagnetic oxygen that's the important thing. When Bockris and Sundaresan synthesized iron in carbon arc verification of George Osawa, the Japanese carbon arc element synthesis experimentalist, the discoverer or the founder of the microbiotic diet, they found in, I think, 1994-6 that when they did the carbon arc underwater, if they took the water and they boiled it to remove all of the gases in it, and then they saturated it with nitrogen, they saw no synthesis of iron. If they just took water, deionized water, or put oxygen in there, they saw synthesis of iron. And they hypothesized that iron is part of the reaction in terms of the actual nucleus of oxygen is part of the reaction. I'm arguing that oxygen enables the reaction by being the magnetic hook on which the hidden energy within matter that's extracted during the discharge process can allow for the bulk coherent matter to form, which leads to the production of the ion. So Charlie C has asked a question. Where is it? Charlie C, Bob, do you think that if we touched an aluminium foil sheet for some time and then we place it into an ultrasonic cleaner, that we can use our intent to cause more EVOs to form on one side of the foil? I think most of that is caused by the first and third harmonic interaction, potentially. That leads to the necessary vortices with the easy water and preparators coherent ground state of water to lead to the fractal toroidal moment, or at least a first order toroidal moment that leads to the dark matter manipulation and the synthesis and desynthesis of matter depending on the rotation. I think that mostly the sound will overcome. What I can say is that if we employ the method used by the Russians in their hydrowave technology, which in my view is designed to increase the hydrogen component and the oxygen dissolved in the water, where, as I said earlier in this presentation, they actually had an electric arc in the system before it went through the cavitation system, I think we'll get faster synthesis of elements, faster production of iron, faster decontamination of material, and so forth. So I would like, the question is then though, what do you use as your discharging electrodes in that process, because you'll be contaminating the water with those. So like if you can maybe take a very pure nickel electrode pair to do your discharges, that might be fine. You've just got nickel in there, you've got the 5 isotopes or whatever it is, 58, 60, 61, 62, 64, 58, 60, 61, 62, 60, yeah, 5 isotopes. And then, you know, you might expect products being synthesized because you've got the nickel in there. But anyway, you would have more oxygen and more hydrogen in there. Okay, so a lot of people have sent me some really nice tidbits, and I haven't been able to get round to them. It's been an exhausting couple of weeks, and it's going to get more interesting as we get towards the Stettin, the ICCF. I've got a 20-minute window to do my presentations. My intention is to produce little video presentations or PDFs which have a QR code, and on the slides I'll have a QR code, and I'll basically say at the start of the presentation, if you've got any questions on my hand waving, look at the QR code and you'll have the facts there. Something like that, because 20 minutes is not enough to get across what I want to say. So I will get to it, but thank you very much for sharing that, and I will consider it when I can. So Bringer of Change said, I just tried to bend the shaft of a spoon with my mind. It didn't work. Well, you got to be really, really intensely intending to do it. I've not tried it myself. You know, George Eagley went to Israel in 1983, I believe it was, and he filmed teenage boys doing it. I believe teenage boys are specifically able to be better at doing it from the point of view that they have intense emotional states as they come into early teenagehood, and they have intense desires, and they can project those into various things. And so I believe that's why young teenage boys specifically are able to do this very well. I think it may get harder, although if you're trained, possibly you can do it at any age. But it's harder to just do it very, very easily when you're not a boy and not in those tempestuous changes that occur during teenage years. You might need a metal that has crystal grain boundaries, as that has been identified as the mode by which this material bends. So just don't worry about metal per se. You want a metal that is hard enough that you cannot bend it just by finger strength, but you would ideally want some metal that has crystal grain boundaries. It's easier to get excited in general when you are hormonal. Yes, that is the point. Yeah. So 3 has asked, Bob, if the creator, that gods, had access and disseminated this technology to early humanity, how would you hypothesize this tool would be used for play? For play? What do you mean? Like, you just need to look at the introduction to Flash Gordon, and you can see what a god might choose to use this technology for. Go and see the introduction to Flash Gordon. What puny humans? What do we do to the puny humans? Yeah, so Standish is saying this is why ritualistic practices are probably necessary. You can evoke emotion with music, dance, group together. This is why you see people that are trying to create a movement, a societal change or a shift in perspective. They first create anger and outrage, or fear, and then they are literally getting that fear and using it, because they are telling the people that are in fear or angry where to project their will and their intent. And so you mustn't let yourself be angered by just the speaking of others. You must always keep centered and have a sense of objective truth. It's too easy to be led. It really is too easy to be led to doing negative things that would otherwise be not something you would want to do. Yeah. So does Mercury have lots of grain boundaries? Mercury is already a liquid, obviously. Mercury, specifically isotope 199, has a lot of transmutation leeway in terms of neutrons. and it also is a spin nuclei. And so if you had a thing that produced a lot of spin with things, then it would get caught up in that. Three asks, if they had mastered and you could create, reform, synthesize any element in anything else, into anything else, what on earth do you think they were making back in the day? I have specifically said in 2019 in a video I recorded with Matt Lowen on the periphery of the global BEM in the Netherlands, that I believe that this technology, from what I've seen, it produces things on a statistical basis. So depending on your inputs and the resonance and the intensity of the energy you have, when the system collapses, it produces a range of products skewed to the most common ones you will see on Earth in the crust. But at the extremes, you will get other proportions of things, and it's a resonant phenomena. So if you had this technology, I have argued that what you would do is you would go to a blank piece of space, you would spin it up, you would create a solar system, and you would come back in, say, 4 billion years, and you would set up a colony and start mining the nodes on which there are resonant elements that you would choose to make. Rather than trying to do things incredibly small in the lab, you would just make a bit of the infinite space your playground, and that's how you would play. You would make planets, and you would put life forms down there to do the mining of the elements that you want. Gold, I've argued, because it's got 79 protons, and that means it has 79 electrons, and because it's noble, it doesn't oxidize, and when you put these things into materials, they seem to decay very, very quickly. Like iron rusts extremely quickly, aluminium corrodes really, really quickly, copper would tarnish, silver would tarnish, or copper would oxidize very quickly, but gold is very good. So it not only can it store a lot of these things that pretend to be electrons, it can do it in a way that it doesn't degrade. And so I've argued for that reason that gold is probably the most important element in the periodic table for storage of this energy. Yes, atoms as batteries. And I think probably the Padmaswami temple in Kerala, with, you know, I think one statue is like 7 tons of gold, and it has these literally it has whole buckets of Roman era mint condition coins in gold, like unimaginable amounts of gold in there. And I think it was just a charging device. So 3 says, you mentioned having the Great Pyramid as perhaps some form of terraforming device. That's an enormous use for this tool. What else do you think it may have been used for in terms of play, if anything? Oh, I've just discussed that. I mean, but yeah, the what else would the pyramid have been used for? I've argued that it would be used for producing condensed etheric matter, specifically probably depositing into the king's so-called sarcophagus, that this would be equivalent to Hajar al-Falasifa, which is the philosopher's stone, Acc Mana, Acc food of the gods, Muktva, that kind of thing. Yeah, so Standish is saying, yeah, I believe the Padmaswami temple is just you go and mine the coal, You trade it, you store it in here, and, you know, periodically we'll come along and collect it. Yeah, so Corky's got the point. Yeah, it's Hajar al-Falasifa. Philosopher's Stone. Yeah, Standish says it is a protection payment, a gift. I don't know who would particularly know that. There may be some people who will let in on the thing, you know. There was arguments that the fallen angels that came to Earth, the giants, they were doing the mining initially, but then they didn't want to do it. So then some people say that Enki synthesized man, Adama and Eva, and these were fairly docile creatures that they could teach enough to, because they had enough of the genetics in order to go out and give them a financial system which relied on gold and go and mine the gold, and that's good, right? Because we need to collect the gold, and we don't really know why. So Harry said, Bob, I know you probably explained this, and I know it takes the energy out of the cloud to make molecules condense, but could you briefly summarize how the Cloudbuster works again? Yeah, so it creates a vortex, and the vortex has a phase singularity. In the case of these ones, you know, you're trying to create turbulence. Wherever you have turbulence, you're going to have subturbulence, and in those systems, you are ending up with the friction. The friction leads to static electricity. Static electricity are these things. If it aggregates or it forms turbulent structures, they will self-organize, and, you know, out of chaos comes order out of chaos, and this leads to the condensation process. So you can kind of think of it a bit like the Rank-Hirsch vortex tube, but in the sky, if you know what I mean. If you've got vortices going around and they're interacting with each other, at some point you're going to get low pressure and high pressure zones and condensation going on. So okay, so I'm just going to do a quick review of what we have talked about today. So this was O'Day Summoning UFOs. Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, 28th of July 2023. And in there, this is not any picture that I took. This is fake. This is synthesized clouds. This is a synthesized orb. It's not real. President Kennedy, in his speech to the United Nations in September 25, 1961, said then that our country, USA, would propose cooperative efforts between all nations in weather predictions and eventually in weather control. And that's the reference to that document there. So following my presentation, O'Day Clouds and Tornadoes, I was sent this by Mescal and by Paul, the video of which this is the title frame, Etheric Weather Engineering on the High Seas with Trevor James Constable, 1989. And so it was inspired by the work of Grebenikov, channeled through Alexander Frolov, and presented in the Russian community and then into the APEC community. These are straws, and they use a process of vibration, which is not the same in the length to the width, and possibly puffs out toroidal vortices from these tubes of ether, which are cohered and maybe are projected up into space and form order out of chaos. And then I went through a series of aspects from O-Day Morning Not Morning, which I will switch to now, which was presented originally on 12th of February 2023. And that was this Coptic Christian stele, which I believe is one of the most important documents, scientific documents on Earth. You have an angel of death, Omega, and an angel of life, Alpha. You need both of them, and they are self-similar. So, just to clarify here, this ring here, for a ring to be formed, you need a minimum of 2 subtors. Okay? Always. So, the minimum requirement is 2 subtors. Okay? Therefore, this is an n-2. This is an n-1. Sorry, this is an n-3. This is an n-2. This is an n-1, and this is the n that comes up through the center. This is the rho. Okay, this is the overall structure is the chi, and this is the rho, the torsional flow of prana, of chi energy. They can be of 2 forms. The yin on the right, where you're extracting energy at a distance, creating a structure here with 0 albedo, and single bath thermal extraction, and pulling that energy into the phase singularity at the center of the Mobius strip here. And the opposite of that is, and this will be synthesizing something in the middle here. In the yang, you are desynthesizing something and projecting the energy out. Okay, this, in my view, is what is going on in the Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, and possibly in the Cloudbuster as well. This would be what's going on in the death ray of Tesla. Okay, it's the same principle. And it has the spirals coming in, the same as you see on the ocean in the NOAA 1970s photo, or 1960s, 1970s photo, with the high-speed water movement coming in on the vortex. And then from the side you have the triangles of different shape depending on what material it is. And it is the Shak-Paranoff triangle from the vortex in some of his writings was deduced to be this ratio, which is definitely not the golden ratio. It is the Sothic ratio, closer, and I expect it is the Sothic ratio, and the area of projection out to this point here is the same as this notch area here, as we've shown in many experiments. And so the 1914 patent has the exact ratio on the non-conductive wooden tower, but we know that the phase singularity is at the center of the fractal toroidal structure in the D4D ratio, and that the subtors are created in the plasma globes that are arranged around the vortex structure. We know the vortex is pulling like that, so it's coming in. And so the energy extraction will be below ground, and I suspect there would have been a flowing source of water under there to allow for continuous extraction of energy. Then the next one was a couple of slides from Game Over, which was presented on the 15th of May 2022. And we will go there. So, lots of stuff in this presentation. But the ones that are particular interest here is the binding to magnetic materials here with ball lightning production, a plasmoid. And these are both north and south monopoles. They change the fine structure depending on the magnet that was placed on the back to focus different types. And that in low pressure air, in a water flow plasma discharge, they produced both types, and you can see both types coming together here. You have a north and a south, and a north and a south here coming together. Okay, here you have potentially a north and a north coming together, and this is not a coincidence that he drew this, right? So this is very, very strong evidence of basically the hypothesis. The synchrotron fires high energy electrons into a conversion target, something like tungsten, that produces gamma rays. The magnetic field is there to cause the electrons to, the extra electrons to be pulled off to one side, so you only get the gamma rays going through. That is the gamma rays that are exposing here in between the magnet plates, but over here you've got the magnetic structures both up, above and below that have been knocked off according to Bogdanovich. That is those that are aggregated onto the magnet. And this is a hypothesized ball lightning structure that was produced in the same experiments, and this is a long-lived plasmoid that was observed. And we had already shared this one prior to their peer-reviewed published research from the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. Okay? And then you've got Ken Shoulders here. But it does, now electrical charge does not let charge disappear, but it does in this multiple toroidal form. Okay, I like that. Okay. So that was that. And so we know that we can store this in water, but Constable changed his original designs that did store stuff in water. I mean, of course, this entire device is on a water thing, but these look like PVC tubes, right? Maybe with an aluminum back. But I believe there's something suspended in there. And he mentions that they replaced the water in his video with something else, but it doesn't go into that. But these are all simple projectors of etheric force. And so typically they are going... These are projecting into the prevailing etheric flux. So that is why they are pointing into that direction. And he says they back up, and he explains it quite well in the video. And then in the next slide, it goes through a whole bunch of devices.
Termite. It's called the termite because it literally bores. Here is another of those termites, a different size. There are many variants of the termite. This is the 4x4, about the size of a coffee cup. This is the box Apache. It is a basic generator of etheric vortices. Those two truncated cones are manifolded into an etheric energy accumulator. This is Irv Trent's skimmer, simpler than the simplest transistor radio, yet capable of generating rain under conditions of a high barometer. You'll see it working. Here are a couple of skimmers attached to a rotating bar. This is called a spider skimmer. Like the skimmer, it raises hob in the atmosphere. Some of these devices, as you can see from my hand, are very small indeed. This is the Matterhorn, 2 tonally tuned chambers. This gets you into the ether and causes the ether to react with this device as you move and rotate it. This is the spider, a generator of vertical etheric vortices. This is capable of surrounding a moving vessel with rain or near rain conditions. Here is a spider operating below decks. They work just the same, no matter how much steel you put around them. If you happen to be a physics professor, this...
So you get the idea, and they're all based off the simple original device.
This...
And here was the first Cloudbuster, 1979. So the understanding was well advanced by 1979. And no device on, ship in the center, device turned on, 10 to 12 miles out, it starts producing a cone of rain, and then they turn it off, and you just have the remaining residual rain echoes in the kind of arrowhead left. And that is that. Then there is another here with a different type of device, but with a very familiar type of birdie type structure. Then I talked about the work of Caligina and ball lightning there, and slightly out of sync here. We went into the coherent matter waves and the fact that this does single bar thermal energy extraction. We talked about the mode by which you are able to cause the, how should we put it, the Jack Houck psychokinesis, spoon bending, and the fact that it is expected that this projects into the crystal grain boundaries. That's what they observed on the metal, and that I said that this is what was going on with John Hutchison to a degree, and explained to the best of my ability in a short period of time what is going on. Potentially that would help bring understanding to the so-called mind-bending concept of George Hathaway in his book there about his time working with John. And so that is mostly that. Thank you very much for your time here. Let's see if you've got any questions. Otherwise, yes, I've heard of Dutch Sense rather. He's got some really good ideas, and you know, obviously, you release stress somewhere, and it might stress somewhere else. So that's kind of what happens. Like it's a bit like the breaking of a piece of metal, or breaking you know anything. You put stress and it breaks here, and then there's a bit down here that's now under stress. So 3 says, lastly, Bob, did you catch the US government talk the other day concerning US disclosure contact with UAPs? Yeah, I did. Still nothing that you can see of any substance. I am wondering whether they will roll out their phony UFO invasion prior to potentially the experiment I want to do later this year, categorically showing an effect which will be beyond imagining could really be possible. But it will verify totally John Hutchison, and it will verify Tesla, and it will be totally conclusive. It should be completely repeatable. And it will show that it is a technical process. So, Bob, do you think the others that have replicated Hutchison's effects are using psychokinesis? No, I think this can be genuinely just technologically done. What I'm arguing is that John used his experience listening to the clicking that you get between AM radio stations, and it gets worse when you have more of these things getting oversaturated and going bang. And then secondly, because he's connected to it, he knows how to tune the radio, but without like all the different interacting frequencies, because he's iterating to a sense where he can feel the stress in the things that he's he's entangled with. However, if you just know the frequencies that a particular metal will respond at and allow for aggregation of these clusters in zones, then it's just a technological process. I think the advantage of trying to portray it as something that can never technologically be produced is that then you know if you're not a particular person, you can't do it, so don't bother trying. It automatically excludes nearly everyone, right, from even bothering. And people don't like wasting their time, right, generally. But we know that in 1992, Tom Bearden sent some Russian-speaking English engineers to Moscow, and they witnessed two things. One, kilowatts of power being sent down 8-micron wires, and that had a Tesla discharge spark gap. Then secondly, they showed them cold metal forming. So we know this is a technological process. At least those aspects of it. So a black cube seeing through a sphere. Well, it almost doesn't matter what the shape is, to be honest, because you create the structure inside, and it'll create a sphere on the outside. So you could be almost anything inside. You know, in the case of the pyramid, it's a pyramid, and it'll produce a sphere that projects through the surface. But if you had the internal fractal toroidal structure a little bit bigger, then the sphere would be completely encapsulating the pyramid. It's just the fact that the pyramid, in my view, is designed so that the pyramidion is outside of the overall sphere, the coherent matter sphere that gets produced. So it doesn't matter. All I would say is if the pyramid, sorry, if the cube is specifically located in the center, then you could almost work out what the size of the structure is, you know, what the size of the fractal toroidal structure inside is. Bring of Change says, I think they're dragging it out. Dragging it out? I'm pretty sure I walked through a paper in 1979 that was talking about these things, you know, in exactly the same terms as they've been referring to them recently, like in exactly all of their properties. Dragging it out? I've literally shown you today that in 1957 to 1960, they were filming so-called UFOs at 1000 Palm Springs, and they went on to use these cloudbusters to encourage them to appear. And in 1961, they're talking about weather modification, and you know, they're referring to these things as manifesting plasmoids in the environment. So let's say, come on. This has been known for so long. So it's just so long. It's tiresome. It's just really tiresome. And it's like they get these so-called experts up there that haven't got a clue about anything. And, you know, hopefully they get something more interesting said behind closed doors, but I doubt it. And I doubt the people listening would even understand or recognize it, even if they did. Because you kind of have to have quite a little bit of background understanding to be able to even accept what might be suggested. It takes a long time. So Standish said, do you think the generators can be interrupted with enough people focusing with intent to disrupt it? The problem there is that what you could generate more and then attack it with the ones that you have under your conscious control. Potentially that. But the one that is generated, like maybe technologically, because like
we are transmitters and receivers for electromagnetic waves and for stimuli from interaction with electrons. Like even just touch is stimuli with electrons, right? Yeah. Don't you think that it is by intent non-disclosure in the guise of disclosure? I think what I argued early in the presentation that there's a lot of framing going on, that if there's any really interesting information, then don't want you to know it. So they're only telling you the things they do want you to know. Is like, people have got hurt from this. People have got hurt from talking about this. These things can be dangerous for us. We have no means of defeating them. They far exceed anything we can make. Like, it's like, oh, come on. Seriously? Show us the money. Or rather, show me the... Do not think that anything that is glowing in the sky is anything other than a technological phantom or a man-made creation, unless you see it landing an outcome, guys, and they go, we don't like you, we want to end you, or we like you, we don't want to end you. Worry about it then. Do not, under any circumstances, worry about loads of fireflies in the sky. Just don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm gonna join the technicians. Do not fear. Do not fear. Do not be led. Do not get overexcited. These things do enable. The technology does enable these things, right? It does enable these things, and almost certainly have. But little balls flying around in the sky, things that look cold on radar, on infrared cameras, doesn't seem to have a propulsion. It doesn't have a propulsion because it's a phantom. They're tools for weather modification. Yes, you can use them for defense. Yes, you can use them to stop someone's heart. Those kind of things. Yes, you can over-energize the atoms in someone's brain and cause them cancer. It's really unfortunate that these things are possible. But don't let pretty things in the sky get you worried. Just go, oh, look what they're trying to show us. Isn't it nice? Come on, let me show me the device. Where have you hidden it? Is it in the 18-wheeler, or is it in the underground over there? Because it doesn't need to be above ground. All right. Thank you very much for your time. Buenas noches, dobro noc, good night.